Alright, welcome back to this next video in the series. In the last video, we set up the rest of our death state, or death system, whatever you would call it. We are going to add more to it later on, but for now we're going to move on to another function. But first, I want to explain something I should have explained in the last video, and that is we created this variable isDead when we collide with the death collision that is triggered to be set to 1, which is true. And then we are able to come down here and compare that when it is equal to 1, we destroy the player and restart the layout. And we'll change the restart layout later on. We'll send it to a different layout. But the point I wanted to get at is that when it does restart the layout, we do not have this variable reset to 0. But the reason we don't is because we don't need to. Because whenever we do what we're going to do in this video, which is create a start level function, which we will call each time we want to start a level, no matter what level it is, we will use this new function we're about to create. And in that function, we are going to create the player each time. And that prevents us from having to reset this variable. And I'll show you if we click on our player in the meta, I'll go ahead and drag him in here for a second. And we can see that we have our isDead, its initial value is 0. So whenever we collide with the collision eventually in our code, we end up destroying the player object. And then in our function that we're about to create, we create a new one and it creates it with the variables that we have set, which is going to be that isDead is set to 0. So what I'm trying to say is that we don't need to reset this back to 0. It's going to do it for us when it creates the player each time. I wanted to make sure that was clear. I did not leave that out. We just don't need that step. Okay, let's go over to our level 1. First off, if I click on our player object, I can see that his size is 20 by 42. So what I'm going to do is we're eventually going to get rid of this guy so that we don't have to have him placed on every level we create. So what I'm going to do is double click to create a new sprite. And let's pick our sprite. And I'm going to place it over here by my little palette. And I'm going to make it 20 by, what did I say, 42? 20 by 42? Sounds good to me. Then with my fill tool, I'm going to pick just a blue color of some kind. That's my personal preference. And I'm going to fill it. And then I'm going to set the origin point to the bottom middle. And the polygon does not matter. I'm going to exit out of that and I'm going to rename this spawn player. And it does not need any other properties. So I'm going to zoom in here and I'm going to take our little guy and pull him over here, and I'm just going to delete him off of our layout. Okay, so now I'm going to take our spawn player sprite, and first off I'm going to turn my snapping on, and then I'm going to just snap him into place. So now we can use this spawner to place wherever we want in our levels, and our code in our function that we are about to create will reference this. Another thing I want to do with this selected, let's go ahead and just drop the opacity down. I'm just going to do 50 so we can see through it. And then with it selected, let's scroll down and say initially visible, untick that. Make sure that it is not visible. Let's jump over into our functions tab, and I'm going to create a new group, and I'm going to call this function start level. Okay, now I'm just going to right click in an open area and I'm going to choose add function, and I'm going to name it start level and hit enter. And this is our start level function. I'm going to slide that into our new group here. We are going to create our player. So let's add an action, go to System, Create Object, and that object is going to be our player. And the layer is going to be on the player layer. Our X is going to be player, I called it spawn. Spawn player dot X for the X value, and then spawn player dot Y for the Y value. So on our level, we have deleted our player and we have our spawner in place. So I'm going to play this, and we did not set up anything. So this is good to see. This is the top left of our little castle, which is this dotted line. That is our viewport. We did not set our camera up. And we actually have our camera over here. I am not sure which layer that is on. It is on tile maps. So actually, I'm just going to take this camera object and I'm going to delete it. And then I'm going to lock all these back up. Okay, so aside from our layer and the collisions for the layer, the only thing we should have on the layer is our player, our player spawner right there. All our other things that we had sitting off to the side, those should be gone. And we can actually, I'm going to unlock collisions, and I'm actually going to just delete our palette too, because we're done with this level. We don't really need it. So this is all you should have on your layout. And I'm going to lock that back up. I'm going to go back to our function. I'm going to set up an additional part of our start level function. So this section of our start level function is going to be where we create the player. We'll set the initial animation, and then we're going to just reset a bunch of variables in this part. And then the other part, we are going to do the rest of our code. So I'm going to right click on our start level function, and I'm going to say add blank subevent. We have add subevent and add blank subevent. We want the blank subevent. And we're going to leave the condition part blank, and we're going to add an action. And that action is going to be System, Create Object, and that object is going to be our camera. And that is going to go on our player layer. And we are going to set its initial position to our player. So just player dot X for the X value, and then player dot Y for the Y value. And then over here in our main, we set up our camera earlier on to always follow the player, but it can't follow the player unless it exists. And we have, in our functions, we have now created it, so it should exist. So I'm going to try this again. Okay, so we're still getting that, and I don't know why I didn't do this part first. So we haven't called the function yet. So this code just exists. It's not doing anything. So we're going to set up yet another event sheet. And I'm going to go over here to our event sheets. And I'm going to right click, say add event sheet, and I'm going to name this one lowercase e underscore level 1. I'm going to make that level underscore 1. So e underscore level underscore 1. That's just for readability. And we have it called up here. This is how we are going to set up our levels. So if we go over to our level 1 layout, we can go over here into the properties, and we had the event sheet reading off the main, but now we're going to change that to level 1 event sheet. All right, now stick with me here. If we come back over to our main, we had it on this one because we had our controls and our objects event sheet included in the main. So when we were running off the main event sheet, we also had these event sheets available for us. So now in our level 1, all we have to do is let's right click, include event sheet, and pick the main event sheet. So when we are playing the game and we are on the level 1 layout in the game, it is going to read the level 1 event sheet. The level 1 event sheet is going to read the main event sheet, and the main event sheet is going to read controls and objects event sheet. So everything is going to be included when we are on level 1. So back on our level 1 event sheet, add an event, pick system on start of layout. So when our level 1 event sheet is called, which is when we go to our level 1 layout, we're going to add an action, go to our functions, and we're going to call start level. So now, if we go to our level 1 layout, let's preview this, and there's our player running with the camera object, and he's jumping into eternity. Okay. We will have to fix that part as well. So one of the things that was happening there, if we click on our camera object, and let's go into our meta layout. If we click on the camera object, actually let's pull it into the meta layout, we can scroll down and we see that initially visible is unticked, meaning we don't want it to show. But when we played it just now, it did show. But if we pull the camera object into our meta layout, it now exists in the game. So if we go back to our level 1 layout and we preview, now the camera object does not exist anymore. But we do still have a jump issue. We will take care of that. So let's go back into our functions and let's tell our player not to move just yet when the level starts. So in our sub event, I'm going to add an action, go to system, I'm going to type in group and set group active. And the group name is going to be the player controls. I don't see it popping up there. I certainly hope that's the name. Let's set that to deactivated. And in controls, we have, oh, that's because I didn't set it up as player controls. Okay. On our controls event sheet, let's right click and add a group and call this player controls. There we go. I'm going to slide this all the way to the top, and then I'm going to pick our running, our jumping, our change directions, and I'm going to slide all three of those groups into our player controls group. So now these are all subgroups of player controls. We can close that up, go back to our function, and now our player controls should be read. So I'm going to add another action, and I'm going to say system, type in group, set group active, and I'm going to say player animation, and I want to deactivate that as well. Okay, I'm going to play that. And now our player is not moving. I have no control. We can't jump, but the animation is still going. So let's exit out of that. Let's come up here in our first little section of our function and add an action to this section. And let's find our player object, set animation, and I'm going to choose idle. That's the one we set up for him just standing there. Okay, preview that, and there we go. He's just standing there waiting for the next thing to happen. So another thing I want to set up in this function is the direction that he faces, because in our game, in our level 1, the way I designed it, he starts on the far right and he begins running to the left. But if you've noticed, the previous times we've play tested, he always starts running to the right and he hits that wall before he turns around. Well, I want him to face the other direction, but I don't want that to be permanent because I want to be able to fill in a parameter each time I make a new level that tells him, or that tells the game which way our player is facing when we begin the layer. So level 2 will design him on the far left, starting out facing to the right. But I don't want to have to program that in each time. So we're going to set that up in our function. So if we just right click right here, we can go down to add parameter. And it's because we are right clicking on a function. We can add a parameter. And this is basically just like a local variable. It is going to be a new variable that is specific to this function. So I'm going to call this direction. And I'm going to change the type to a string, which means a set of letters or words or anything that is not a numerical value. Okay, so there's our parameter right there. I am going to right click on this function again, and I'm going to say add, and I'm going to go down to add sub-event. We're going to go system, and we'll scroll down to compare variable. And you notice that's the only variable we have available because we are specifically in this function. So I'm going to say when direction is equal to, and the value is going to be in quotation marks, left, hit enter. And then I am going to copy and paste and go into this and replace left with right. So now we should have two conditions comparing direction variable to left and right. And I'm going to move this sub-event below. Make sure that line lines up with the edge because we want them all to be even with each other on this left side. So this is what you should have so far. In our comparing direction left, I'm going to add an action. We're going to find our player object, and we're going to go down to instance variables, and we're going to set the Boolean of running left to true. So let's hit done. And what we did, we checked to see what this parameter is set at. If it is set at left, then we're going to make sure that the instance variable that we made for our player is set to true because running left is true. He's going to be running to his left, which will tell over here in controls, it will tell this that running left is true, so it's going to simulate going left. All right, back in our function, highlight this and copy it, and then highlight this and paste it, and then we can just go into this and change it true to false, which is going to send him back the other direction. Now another thing we got to do is when we start the level, our player is going to be facing to the right because that's how he is set up in the sprite. If we want him facing to the left, we need to mirror him. So in our left condition, let's add an action, find our player, and we want to mirror, set mirrored to mirrored. That way he'll be facing to the left. And then we can highlight that, copy it, come down here, paste, go in and change it to not mirrored. That is set up, that is that easy. So now if we go back over to our level 1 event sheet, you can see now our function, when we call our function, there's a new parameter on there. And if we double click to go into it, we can set the parameter. So in quotation marks, I'm going to say I want him to start out facing to the left. So I'm just going to type in left, and that is going to correspond with this condition right here. And when we play, there he is. He is now facing to the left. All right, I'm going to exit out of that. And we are eventually going to be setting up more parameters for this function start level. We also have quite a bit more code to add to these two sections, this top section and this bottom section. Our direction section is done. And I'm going to end this video here, and in the next video we are going to continue on our start level function. I will see you then. Don't forget to save.